Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Maciej Józefowicz, and I have a pleasure of welcoming you now in this session about Visual Studio workflows and other third-party SharePoint solutions. Now, with me today is our guest, Paolo Pialorsi, an Office 365 MVP, SharePoint author, and speaker at many webinars and conferences. Now, another guest today is Dominik Daniewski, a presales engineer from Datapolis, a provider of workflow graphic solutions for SharePoint, now who will then show his solution. Now we will compare them both and decide which one works better. The whole session should take now more or less an hour. We will try to keep it within 60 minutes, but if you will have some more questions or doubts, you wish to know something more, now we can certainly stay longer with you. Okay, so now please don't hesitate to ask any questions if you are unsure of whatever or you would like to know more. Now we'll be happy to help you. Okay, so now this is enough from my side now. And now, Paolo, I believe you may begin.
Okay, thank you, and welcome everybody to this webinar. Good morning or good afternoon, depending in which part of the world you live. And today we will talk about how to create workflows for SharePoint using Visual Studio compared with third-party tools. I'm Paolo Pialorsi from psys.com. I'm a manager, consultant, and trainer in my own company. I'm a Microsoft Certified Master on SharePoint and an MVP on Office 365. In my career, I wrote about 10 books on XML, SOAP, .NET, Link, and SharePoint as well. And I am a speaker at the main IT conferences worldwide. But let's move to the real content of this webinar. And let's start talking about the features and the capabilities of the workflow engine that we had in SharePoint 2010 and that we still have in SharePoint 2013 for backward compatibility. First of all, the SharePoint 2010 workflow engine was completely coupled with the SharePoint farm. In fact, it was executed and it is still executed in 2013 in the same processes and within the same server farm that hosts the SharePoint farm. It was available both in SharePoint Foundation and SharePoint Server, and it was able to create declarative or code-based workflow solutions. However, there were also some key missing features in the SharePoint 2010 workflow engine. First of all, from a capabilities perspective, we were missing a bunch of useful capabilities that we had to create by hand, writing code and writing custom activities. It was not really scalable and highly available, and it wasn't cloud ready. So the biggest issue in the 2010 workflow engine was the missing feature of being cloud ready if you think about the goal of Microsoft to move everything on Office 365. That's why in 2013 the new workflow engine has been rewritten from scratch, and it is now completely decoupled from SharePoint. It is available in the SharePoint server offering only, so keep it in mind. And when you create a workflow definition with the new workflow engine of SharePoint 2013, you can mainly write markup-based and declarative-based workflows, and you can only use code-based workflow in case you want to play on-premises only. So if you want to target with your solution both SharePoint on-premises and SharePoint Online in Office 365, you will have only the capability to write a declarative solution with no code, or at least no direct code. The designer of the workflows in SharePoint Designer 2013 has been greatly improved, but you still have the capability to create workflow definition, declarative workflow definitions, using Visual Studio 2013. And that's what we will do shortly in this webinar. It is a new engine which is completely cloud ready and cloud-based. So you can still use it on premises if you want, but it's already available out of the box in the Office 365 and SharePoint Online offering. It is app-oriented. In fact, as you will see, to create a SharePoint your workflow, you can simply create a SharePoint app, and you can add a workflow definition inside of that app. It is really scalable and highly available because of its architecture. It's secure and safe because it leverages the security infrastructure, the authentication and authorization infrastructure provided by the SharePoint app model. And it is still extensible or by declaring extensions, still using a declarative model, or even, but only on premises, writing some custom code that you can deploy on your on-premises farms. From an architectural perspective, you should think about the SharePoint 2013 engine on one side. You can see on the left side of this schema the SharePoint 2013 architecture and farm, in which you have a workflow services manager component, which will allow you to manage workflow instances, workflow deployment, so the deployment of workflow definitions, the interoperability with the 2010 workflow engine, just for backward compatibility, as I told you, and a messaging engine to talk with the external workflow manager. I say external because the workflow manager is running outside the SharePoint farm, and the SharePoint farm will use a client library to communicate with the external workflow manager using an asynchronous communication pattern based on the service bus, which is a service provided by Azure or by Windows Server. On the other side, whenever the workflow manager needs to call back the SharePoint farm, it will use the REST APIs published and offered by SharePoint 2013. And in the middle, between the communication back and forward between the SharePoint farm and the workflow manager, there will be the access control manager that will use the open authorization protocol to authorize and secure the communication. So, from this perspective, we will be able to create our own custom workflow solutions, either using SharePoint Designer or Visual Studio, but mainly in the same way, that is in a declarative way. And to show you how to do that, I decided to create from scratch and live in this webinar a real business case workflow, which is a leave request workflow, which will be created as a state machine because it is a workflow that will have a human interaction. And in my personal opinion, whenever I have a workflow with human interaction, I prefer to create a state machine workflow. There will be some approval steps inside my workflow, some approval tasks assigned to target users, and even some custom task forms to show you how to customize the user interface of the workflow engine. We will see how to create it, and we will see how it is easy or not easy, you will see, to create a real workflow solution using Visual Studio 2013. This will be the outline of the workflow that we will create together. And as you can see, it's a state machine with an initial state, a manager's approval state, a director approval state, an HR confirmation, and a completed state. And of course, because it is a state machine, we will be able to make a transition from one state to another or back to a previous state, like in this case where the director can send the approval workflow back to the manager for more clarification, for more information. So let's move to the demo environment and let's see how to do that by hand using Visual Studio 2013. I will go to my virtual environment, virtual machine, and I will create a new project. The project will be an app for SharePoint project. I will name it Datapolis.liveRequest app. I will create it in the demos Datapolis folder. And it will be a SharePoint app that will target a SharePoint Online tenant, which will be this one in my case. And it will be a SharePoint hosted app. So all my code will be hosted on SharePoint. Let me log in to my tenant, of course, because I need to authenticate in order to deploy my custom artifacts and code. And first of all, we need to define our own idea of leave request list. so that we'll be able to create leave requests inside this new list. So let me add to this project a new item, which will be a content type, which will define the structure of a leave request. And it will be a leave request content type, okay? It will be inherited from the item, from the simplest content type that we have, which is the item. And I will add some custom fields to this new content type. You have the UI-based designer provided by Visual Studio for defining content types, but you also have the XML editor. And I prefer this one in this case. So I will define some fields which will have an ID, a name, a static name, a display name, and of course a type. I will need a unique ID for each of the fields I will create. So let me start the global unique identifier tool to create a new global unique identifier that I will assign to my first field, which will be the Datapolis leave request start date field, which will be displayed as the start date of my leave request. It will be of type date time, and it will have a format of date and time, because my leave request will be from one specific date and time to another. I will copy this field one more time to define the end date of my leave request. Okay, and I will give it a new unique ID, of course. So let me create a new one and let me copy and paste it in lowercase. And then I will have a third field, which will be the leave request comment that I will use to provide a comment related to the leave request I will send. It will be a note field and, of course, not a date time one. And for instance, it will be a rich text field. So rich text true. I will change the unique ID of this field and new GUID, copy, paste. And now I'm ready to add these fields as field references in the field ref section. So I will say this one, and this one are field references, and I will close the field ref tag this way. So now I have my custom content type. The only thing we miss so far is the title of the item, which will be inherited from the base item content type, but I want to customize it with a dedicated description. So I will use a snippet of code just to reuse the global unique identifier of the title field, and I will declare that the title field will have a leave request number, display name, and it will be, of course, a required field. Now my content type is ready to be used. So I will add a new list to my solution. This list will be called leave requests. And I will declare that this is a custom list. And I will use the just created content type as the reference content type for this list. So this will be the leave request content type, and it will be, for instance, the unique content type available in my list definition. I will name the first column as the leave request number column, and it is required, as you can see. And I can copy for further reference the URL of my list. Why? Because in the default page of my SharePoint hosted app, I will add a code snippet, a SharePoint code snippet, to display a list view, which will be an XSLT list view web part, which will target the leave request list. So far, my SharePoint app will be ready to show in its home page the list of leave requests that will be available to the end users, to the employees of my company. So now I'm ready to create the real workflow solution. Let me right-click the project and let me add a new item of type workflow. it will be a new workflow definition, and as I told you, it will be a state machine workflow. Let me call it leave request workflow. This will be the name. It will target a specific list, which will be the list of leave requests. And as any other workflow in SharePoint, the workflow definition I'm creating will need a target history list and task list for its own information, like the history and the list of tasks assigned to the target users. Because I don't already have an history list and a task list, I will ask the wizard to create them for me. I will associate this workflow definition to the target list, and I will configure the workflow to start whenever a new item is created. Click on Finish, and now we have the designer. By default, the designer will provide us with a sequential workflow definition, but I want to use a state machine, so I select and delete the sequence. I go to the toolbox, and I select the state machine workflow. So now I have a start point and the first state in my workflow definition, which will be the init state of my workflow. And from the init state of my workflow, let me reorganize the area, the design of the workflow. I will go from the init state to the manager's approval state, as I told you. So let me design the manager's approval state. Moreover, I will have the director's approval state. Director's approval state. And from the director's approval state, we will go to the HR confirmation state. HR confirmation. And at the very end, we will complete our workflow with a final state, which will be called completed. So now we need to reorganize the design of our state machine workflow, this way, for instance, and we need to connect to define the transitions from one state to another. So from the initial state, we will go to the manager's approval state, of course. And this will be a transition rule, which will be called, let me edit the name, assign, for instance, so that we can assign the approval to the manager. Then from the manager, we will go to the director in case the manager will approve the leave request. So this will be the approved transition. On the contrary, if the manager will reject the leave request, we will have a rejected transition, okay? And if from the director approval perspective, the director will approve the request for leave, the leave request, we will go from the director to the HR confirmation state. So this will be the approved transition from the director's perspective. On the other side, we could have a rejection, and it will be a transition to the completed state, and we will call it rejected again from the director's approval perspective. But we can also send back the approval workflow to the manager from the director. So we can drag and drop a new transition back to the manager, and this will be the need clarifications transition. On the other side, from the HR confirmation, we can go to the completed state to complete the workflow. And this will be the completed state, or the confirm transition from one state to another. So this is the design of our state machine workflow. Now we need to define the transition rules as well as the actions to execute whenever we enter a specific state. So for instance, when we enter the initial state, we need to get some information about the current context. Let me double click on the initial state, and in the entry section of the initial state, we will have to retrieve some information like the target user, so the employee who sent the leave request, as well as all the information, all the fields of the leave request that we need to approve. To do that, I can go to the toolbox and I can add some out-of-the-box available activities. First of all, in the SP current context, I can retrieve the lookup workflow context property. And I will use this activity to retrieve the initiator property of my workflow. And I will place the result of this activity into a custom variable that I will name initiator user, which will be a string, and which will have a scope of the whole state machine, so that I will place the result of this action into the initiator user. Moreover, I want to retrieve the fields of my leave request item. Under the SP list group of activities, I can use the SP list item, the lookup SP list item activity. Here it is. And I will name it get leave request fields. I will create some variables in my workflow definition to hold the values of the fields in my current leave request. So I will create a leave request start date, which will be a date time variable, date time, here it is, and which will have a scope of the entire state machine. I will have a leave request and a date, which will be again a date time with a scope of state machine. We will have a leave request number, which will be a string, and we will have a leave request comment, which will be a string, still and again with the state machine scope. Moreover, we will have a leave request properties container, which will be a dynamic value variable, which will hold the result of the get leave request fields activity we have just created. This time, the leave request properties scope will be just the init state we are creating, or the sequence, because it will be local to this context. So now we can configure the leave request fields activity, which in reality is a lookup SP list item activity, in order to retrieve the current item in the current list to get all the properties, or we can also configure just some specific properties, and the result will be stored inside the leave request properties variable. So now we can click on the Get Properties link we have in the designer in order to get the explicit values of all the fields into the target variables. So now the source of this activity is the leave request properties we have just declared, and we will define that we want to retrieve values from the list item of leave request we have just used, and because of that we will have the leave request number field as well as the leave request start date and end date. Here it is. And lastly, the comment. Here it is. We will store those fields into the corresponding variables. So the leave request number, the leave request start date, the leave request end date, and lastly, the leave request comment. Okay, so now we are ready to execute our workflow, and we have all the information we need to play the workflow. So back to the state machine definition, let me select the manager's approval state, and let me define what will happen in the first transition, which will be the one to go from the manager's approval to the director approval, because the manager approved the leave request. Double click on the approved, and here you can see the designer of the transition. We have to define a trigger which will wake up the transition and which will define what will happen to the workflow flow. So we can say that we want to wait for a task which will be available in the SP task group of activities. For instance, a single task that I will drag and drop into the trigger section of my transition. The trigger will hold for a single task, which I will call manager's approval task. And I will declare that this task will be assigned to a target user, which will be the manager. And in my case, it will be an argument, an input argument of my workflow definition. It will be the target manager. And I will also have a target director, which I will use later. Both will be string argument in input for my workflow definition. And for the sake of simplicity, I will define a default value, which will be my email address to make it simpler and to show you quickly the result. So I will be the target approver for the manager and for the director roles. Okay, so back to the workflow definition. I will click on the configure button, and I will define that the first task, which will be the manager approval task, will be assigned to the target manager. The task title will be, for instance, a string, which will be made of the number of the leave request, and it will be the manager's approval task, leave request number, placeholder 0, which will be the leave request number variable. I will ask to approve, please approve this leave request. I can provide a due date, which can be date time, UTC now, add days, let's say 30. So we have 30 days to approve the leave request. We should wait for the task completion, and the task completion will trigger the transition. We could have an email for overdue, and we can define what will be the outcome of our task. In my case, this task will be a workflow task for SharePoint 2013. The outcome field will be the task outcome field, which is available out of the box in the workflow task. And the default outcome for me will be rejected. And I can only have approved or rejected as outcomes for this kind of task. So now we can say that the output of this task, so the outcome, will be named manager approval outcome. It will be an integer variable, and it will have a scope of the manager approval state. Let me configure the outcome in the task properties, manager approval outcome, and let me see what will be the output, the outcome. If the outcome will be 0, that means approved, I will say that the workflow will write into the history that the manager's approval outcome is approved. On the contrary, if the outcome equals 1, which will be rejected, I will say manager's approval outcome rejected. Okay? And then I will transition to the director's approval or to the completed state. So back to the state machine, let me define what will happen in the director state. In the approved transition, I will have to do the same as before. So I will have to drag and drop a task, which now will be the director's approval task. Director's approval task. I will have to define a new outcome, which will be the director approval outcome, which will be the result, the outcome of my current task. And I will have to configure one more time the task. The target assignee of this task will be the target director. The title will be another string format, which will be director's approval task for leave request number placeholder 0, and I will place again the leave request number variable. Please approve this leave request. And there could be or not a due date. We will see. Okay, let's say it will be daytime UTC now at days, just 10 days in this scenario. We will still wait for the completion, and we will have some overdue emails, and we will have an outcome one more time from the workflow task definition. However, this time we would like to have 3 possible outcomes, which could be the approved, rejected, or need clarification. So far we will use the out-of-the-box task definition, but we will need to create a custom one. So let me save the current status of the workflow. Let me define the first 2 transition rules, which will be based on the director approval outcome. And if it is 0, it will be an approval. And I will be able to say that the director approval outcome is approved. Or I can say that in case the outcome will be equal to 1, I will write that the director's approval outcome is rejected. But in case I want to see if there is a request to provide more clarifications, I will need to define a custom task. So let me go back to my workflow definition, and let me create inside the app project a new content type which will define how is made a custom task which will have 3 possible outcomes. So let me add a new item, a new content type, which will be named, for instance, leave request approval task. And this time I will inherit not from the item content type, but from the workflow task of SharePoint 2013, so that I will inherit the whole behavior of the workflow task, and I will simply change the UI and the possible outcomes. Let me click on Finish, and one more time, let me edit the XML definition of my task. So I will need to create a custom field, which will be the field to hold the outcome of my task. And for the sake of brevity, I have already created a code snippet for that. So let me take it and let me use it. This will be my custom field. I will provide a unique ID to this field. And my field will be a leave request approval outcome, which will be of type outcome choice, which is a new type introduced in SharePoint 2013. And the choice will have these possible values: approved, rejected, or clarification. I will add this field as a field reference inside my content type definition. Moreover, because the out-of-the-box workflow task, as you will see shortly, has quite a ugly user interface, I rather prefer to use a custom UI for my task, for my approval task. So I will stop inheriting the UI from the workflow task of SharePoint 2013, and I will add a custom user interface using an XML document section, which will define the display and edit form as custom pages in my workflow project. So I will add to this project a page under the Pages folder, and this page will be an ASP.NET page named Leave Request Approval Task Form.aspx, and this page will provide the custom UI for my custom task. Again, and to make it easier, I already prepared the HTML and the ASP.NET code for this page, and let me copy and paste it, and I will show you what is inside of the page. This is a standard ASP.NET page hosted in SharePoint, because this one is a SharePoint hosted app. I have the registration of some useful server-side controls, and inside the placeholder additional page add placeholder, I will add a link to the SharePoint.js client-side object model, to jQuery, and to a custom JavaScript file that I will create in a few seconds. Moreover, inside the main content, the placeholder main of my page, I will define a div element, which will be called choseOutComePanel, which will be used to ask to the end user what is the outcome of the workflow task. And the outcome will be defined by pressing one of these three buttons, which will be one to approve, one to reject, and one to ask for more clarification. Regardless what is the button the end user will press, we will always go to the setOutcome function, providing the outcome selected by the user. Lastly, we have another div element, which is the showOutComePanel element, and which will be used to show the already selected outcome whenever an end user will show the task form for a task already completed. So the key feature of the custom task UI will be the JavaScript file that we need to add. So let me show the Solution Explorer, and let me drag and drop an already defined JavaScript file into the scripts folder. This leave request approval task.js file just defines a bunch of JavaScript code so that using jQuery, whenever the document will be ready, I will hide both the choseOutComePanel and the showOutComePanel sections. And as soon as the SP.js JavaScript file will be ready and loaded, I will execute the check task completed function, which simply uses a bunch of SharePoint client object model in JavaScript to retrieve the current context, to get the current web, the list and the current task, and to load the current task. By executing the query asynchronously, I will get back, in case of success, the status and the leave request approval outcome of my task. And if the status is not completed, I will show the UI to complete the task. Otherwise, I will simply show the already selected outcome. When we show the choseOutComePanel, we can use the setOutcome function to get back the outcome selected by the user, and to use one more time the client object model to retrieve a reference to the current task, to make it completed, setting the status field to completed, and setting the outcome inside the leave request approval outcome custom field we have just defined. And one more time, invoking the update method and calling the execute query async function, we will save the new status and the new leave request approval outcome to the target task item. And that's all. So now we simply need to bind the new task content type we have just defined. We need to bind it to the workflow task list. Here it is. We need to add a new element of type content type binding, which will target our custom task content type. And here we are. Now the workflow definition will support our custom task. So we can go back to our workflow definition, and we can say that inside the director's approval task, we want to use our custom task definition. And here it is, which will have a custom outcome field with 3 possible values. And the default value will still be rejected for me, for my workflow definition. But now we can say that if the director approval outcome is 0, it's an approval. If it is 1, it is a rejection. And if it is 2, it is a request for more details, a need clarification request. We can go to the history and write that the director's approval outcome is need clarification. Okay, so the choices behaves like an enumeration. Okay, if we are in a code-based project, we are not, but it behaves almost like an enumeration. Okay, so now we simply need to define what will happen in the HR confirmation step. And what will happen will be that we want to send an email to the employee who sent the leave request to confirm that the leave request has been approved. So we can use the email action, which will have a subject for the email, and the subject could be again a parametric subject, which can be a string format of leave request number placeholder 0, outcome and I will add the leave request number in the subject. The body of the mail will be always, because I will execute the HR confirmation only in case of approval, congrats, your leave request has been approved. Okay. And lastly, we need to define a target for this email. And the target is a collection of strings, because it could be a list of destination address. So let me define a variable, which I will call destination addresses, which will be not a string, but a collection of T, where T is a string. And I will create this collection using the build collection action, which is available, and which will build a collection of string, and the result will be our destination addresses collection, and the values that we will add to the collection will be just one value, an input value of type string, which will be the initiator user. Okay, so now we can configure the destination addresses for our confirmation email address. Okay, back to the workflow definition, and we are almost done. We are ready to play with our custom workflow definition. Let me press F5, but just before that, let me disable the debugger, just in case, in order to avoid having any latency in the execution of my workflow definition. I don't want to debug it. I simply want to show you the result. And now I'm ready to press F5. The Visual Studio Engine will deploy the app to the target environment, which will be the SharePoint Online environment. It will upload the app file. It will deploy the app in the target site, which will be a developer site for developing SharePoint apps. And in about 20 or 30 seconds, the app will be available and ready to be executed. So far we have seen the app, and now we will see how we can play with the workflow definition. We will see the out-of-the-box UI of the manager's approval task, as well as the custom UI for the director's approval task. And overall, you have seen how it is easy or not easy. It depends. It depends on what you want to do. How it is easy or not easy to create a real workflow solution using Visual Studio 2013 and targeting the new workflow engine in SharePoint 2013. We are almost there. The app now is ready to go. We need to log on to the target platform. I will use my own account. I will sign in, and I will be redirected to the Datapolis Leave Request app. Here we are. Now I can create a new leave request item, which will be for myself. It will have the number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I will have a start date, which can be today from 4 p.m. to Sunday 2 p.m. And I can say that I need some rest. Okay, save it. And in a few seconds, if I click on the hyphens here and I go to the workflows, I will be able to see that there is a workflow definition that is running, and it is started. Let me click on it. And as you can see, the workflow is started, and we have a task assigned to myself, of course, because I am the target manager, with a manager approval task for the leave request number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If I click on it, I will see the out-of-the-box UI provided by the workflow task, which is quite ugly, as I told you. I can click on the Edit Item button in the ribbon bar, and I can say that I want to approve or reject this task. Let me say I want to approve it, but take a look at the ugly UI with a lot of stuff, which is not really related to my task. Let me click on the Approved button. In a few seconds, but keep in mind that the engine is asynchronous, my task is completed and the new task to the directors will be created, as well as the item in the history list will be written. So let me press F5 to refresh the page. And as you can see, the manager approval outcome is approved. We are still missing the director approval task because the asynchronous engine of the workflow manager is still working in the background in order to provision the director's approval task. Let me refresh again. And now we have the director's approval task for the same leave request. And keep an eye on the due date as well. Now we can click on the director approval task, and now we will see our custom UI, which of course could be better, but is at least better than the out-of-the-box one, let me say. Now we have 3 buttons to approve, reject, or need more clarification. Let me play with the state machine and let me ask for more clarifications. So the outcome of the director approval will be need clarification. And in a few seconds, it will be available in the history list. Come on, come on. As I told you, it's an asynchronous engine, so I have to wait for a while. Okay, here it is. Director's approval outcome need clarification. Let me press F5 a couple of more times to refresh the UI. And very shortly, here it is, we will have the manager approval task back to the manager. Let's say that the manager wanna approve again this task. He really agree with the leave request of the employee because I'm approving myself leave request. And in a few seconds, we will have again the approval task back to the director. First of all, we will have the outcome in the history list, and then we will have another task for the director. Okay, you can see the manager approval outcome is approved again, and now we will have the director approval task one more time. Let me click on it, and now I will approve it, so that the workflow will complete. But before completing, we'll send the email, the confirmation email, to the target user. So we will see in the history list the outcome of the director, which will be approved this time. And then, here it is. We will see that the workflow has been completed, and inside my Outlook, my Exchange Online mailbox, I will see that the email with the confirmation has been sent to my account. As you can see, the leave request number 12345 has not come, and congrats, your leave request has been approved. So we have seen how the custom workflow created with Visual Studio 2013 behaves in the SharePoint UI and in the Outlook side of the story. So back to the slide deck. Just to say that, as you have seen, the Visual Studio 2013 engine is really customizable, but it takes a long time to create a real workflow solution with a business level of UI and quality and usability. So that's why there are so many players in the market, like Bamboo, AgilePoint, Datapolis, Nintex, and K2, who provide custom tools to easily and quickly create workflow solutions without the need of using Visual Studio. For instance, we can consider one specific solution provided by Datapolis, and that's why I'm leaving the stage to Dominik to show you how you can easily and quickly create a workflow solution using the Datapolis process system. Thanks for your attention, and Dominik, the stage is for you.
Hello everyone. I hope you can hear me fine. Thank you, Paolo. Today I'll have a chance to present to you the same process that Paolo made in Visual Studio, created in Datapolis process system. My time is pretty short, so I'll be really fast. So first of all, I have to create a new leave requests list. So it will be my custom list. Leave requests. Okay, so this is just a list for leave requests. Inside this list, I'll have to enter some fields. First of all, let's rename the title field to leave request number. Okay, let's add a start date field. Which will be a date field. Okay, let's create the end date field, which will as well be the date field. And let's create a comment field, which will be a multiple line of text field. Okay, I've got my list prepared. Now let's just add a process to it. Let's make it live using the Datapolis process system. I'll create a new workflow assigned to the leave requests list. I'll call my workflow approval, as simple as that. Okay, now the designer opens up. And in a second I'll be able to show you how can I create a new workflow. The first time I create a new workflow, the tutorial opens up. I can close it for now. Hope you can see the screen fine. Okay, great. I've got the starting point and the ending point of my workflow. Now I'll have to add something between it. First of all, I need to add the states of my workflow. This will be, as in Paolo's demonstration, the state machine workflow. So my first state's name will be the manager's approval. The second state's name will be the director's approval. And the third state's name will be the HR confirmation. Okay, so I got my states available here. Now I have to connect them with actions. The first action, the initial action, is just a form submit. As in Paolo's presentation, manager can, of course, approve the leave request. So, approve. The director can as well approve the document, the leave request. The HR department can confirm. The director can, of course, reject the document, reject the leave request. Let's just rename it to reject. The manager can as well reject the leave request. Okay. Now, to prove you that this is a state machine workflow, the director can, of course, send the document back to the manager when it needs more information or needs clarification. So let's call this action needs clarification. Okay. Now we want to make it more advanced. So let's create a new variable. Let's call it a comment. This will be a string type object. And now let's give the users the ability to add some comments when they want to reject the document. So let's create a new form with the field comment. Let's make this field required. I'll save this as a template form. So this will be my form template. I'll try to reuse it in all the reject paths of my workflow. I can use the same form in the needs clarification path, so I can reuse this form. Okay, okay. I can see there's mistake here, needs clarification. Okay, of course this is a simple example. We're like forgetting about permissions, we're forgetting the proper assignments of tasks. However, I'm almost done. I'll just save and deploy my workflow. I'll just deploy it to my leave requests list. Once it's deploying, I can open it up in a second window. So we don't have to wait. Okay, my workflow was successfully deployed. So I'm entering my leave requests list. Right now I'm placing the first leave request for this year. I want it to start from the next Monday to next Friday, for example. Okay. If I'll refresh the page, I can see. Let's give it a second. Okay, now it's great. I can see my workflow is already running. I can see that my workflow is in progress. I can see that my form I just submitted is in manager's approval state. And for now, I act as a manager. And as a manager, and as you can see, there's a context menu that appeared here. This is all dynamic. Those are just my outputs of my simple task. I can either approve or reject this leave request. I'm acting as a manager approval, as I said. So I can approve this. Okay. I'm confirming it. Now my form is in director's approval state. As a director approval, as a director, I can say that this document still needs some clarification, so I can send it back to the manager with some comment field I need to add. The field is required, so if I'll try to leave this empty, there's a validation mechanism that won't let me submit this form. So need more info, for example. So this is just what the director said. As you can see, the document is back in manager's approval state. So this is everything I've done here in this logic, as you can see in this visual designer. Okay, I'm back as a manager. Again, as a manager, I can approve this document. Back into director's state. Now, let's say that everything's fine. The director wants to approve the document. Okay, the director approves it. Now we're in the HR confirmation state. Now I'll act as a HR department guy. I can confirm the leave request. And this was the happy path of my workflow. So I can see that my workflow is finished now. I can see that my workflow has completed. I can open up the visual history page. You can see the workflow statistics here. You can see that my whole workflow duration was just 1 minute and 55 seconds. First, the form was submitted. The form landed in manager's approval state. It went to director. The manager approved. It went to director. Director said that it needs some clarifications, and gave it a comment that it needs more info. Then the document went back to manager's approval state. The manager approved. Then it went to director. Director approved, and it went finally to the HR department for some confirmation, and the HR worker confirmed the document. So that's all from me. As you can see, it took me less than 10 minutes to create the working solution, a state machine workflow with a form, with some kind of validation. And as you can see, the tool is just visual tool. It's all drag and drop. No need for coding, no need for using Visual Studio, and so on and so on.
Okay, great. Thank you, Dominik. Thank you, Paolo. And now questions time. Now, before we do that, I will launch a short poll just to Now, just to keep you occupied, and now we have 2 questions on Visual Studio workflow already, and now Paul will explain them in a minute. And right now, we would like to know which of the solution you liked more. Now, which tool did the job better? So, the opinion is up to you. Choose as you wish. And now questions. Now, first question on Visual Studio. How would you go about updating this workflow after it was deployed to production and had running instances? How would you deal with that, Paolo?
Okay, if you create a workflow as an app for SharePoint, there is a way to manage updates of SharePoint apps. So you can define the new workflow definition, you can package a new app file, upload it to the target app catalog, for instance, and the app management service of SharePoint will inform the users, which will be site owner or site collection admin of the target site, that there is a new update available, and they will be ready to update the app. By updating the app, it will be updated the workflow as well. Keep in mind that if you do it that introduces any breaking change, you should handle these breaking changes manually, and there is an event you can intercept, which is the app updating event, which is on your charge, and you should have to do some stuff on your side and using some code to manage the update of your app and the workflow included in the app. So it's not easy, but you can somehow manage it.
Okay, and the second question. How would you handle it if the requester changed the start or end date after adding the request?
Still targeting Visual Studio?
Yes.
Yes, okay. In this scenario, you could use a custom event, which is a capability of the new workflow engine. You have to define inside the workflow a wait point for an external event, and so when the end user will change something in the UI, you can use for instance, an event receiver, a remote event receiver, to inform the workflow instance that something changed outside of his context. Again, it's not the easiest solution, but you can do that.
Okay, and can you reiterate what was the function of the JavaScript file in the process?
The JavaScript file was provided in order to set the outcome of the task. And I had to use a JavaScript file because in my example I used a SharePoint hosted app, and in a SharePoint hosted app you cannot use server-side code like C#, ASP.NET or stuff like that. So it was mandatory for me to use JavaScript because it was the only option I had in that kind of solution.
Okay, and one more question, a little bit longer. I hope we can do that right now. So it is somewhat off topic. I have an SharePoint 2010 SharePoint Designer workflow on a document library. The library has a date time field called Remind Me, and the workflow is supposed to wait until the Remind Me date to send an email. The workflow runs when documents are added. When the workflow starts, the date is null because the user hasn't entered metadata. So what is the best way to handle this? Now, can we answer it now, or can we do it later?
Probably I need to think a little bit about the scenario. By the way, keep in mind that in a Visual Studio 2013 workflow for the new workflow manager, you can use external events again, or you can use a timer, or moreover, you can, more in general, create something waiting for some external event. So if you want to wait for a specific delay or for a specific event, you can do that. There are some activities, some actions like the pick action, in which you can define some branches, and you can wait for any of the defined events. So let's say you want to wait for the fill out of the form, or for a delay, or for an expiration timeout. You can do that using the pick action and using, again, only the out-of-the-box actions, because you have to be declarative. You cannot write code if you want to run your workflow on Office 365 as well as on premises. Instead, if you are only on premises, you can consider writing a custom action by code. It will not be usable in Office 365, but you can do whatever you want, on-prem only.
Okay, now one question for Dominik. Can we migrate Datapolis Workbox from Datapolis Workbox 2010 to Datapolis Process System?
Yeah, there are some mechanisms to migrate from Workbox to Datapolis Process System. It's possible.
Okay, great. So, do you have any more questions? Do you wish to know some more about Visual Studio or workflows or whatever you would want us to ask? Okay, if this is all, I think that we have done for today. So, thank you very much for being here. Thank you very much for watching our presentation. Now, thank you, Paolo, for your part on Visual Studio. Thank you, Dominik, for your part on Datapolis. So, now I have the poll results now. And now, according to your opinion, now 24% of you said that Visual Studio works better. Now 44% claim that our solution Datapolis works better, and 31% think that both work the same. So it's a kind of a nice result for us, and we are happy to know if you think so. Okay, so thank you one more time, and have a great day. And if you need something with workflows or process design in SharePoint, we are here to help you. Thank you all, and goodbye.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.